Hello, Bhavin. Welcome to the Builders Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here today. How are you, first of all?
Doing very well. Exciting times. So, yep, all going good. As you know, we
Great,
just had a major launch yesterday, so all fine.
nice. Can't wait to hear about the launch. But you would like to start to give me a little bit of introduction of yourself, your background, and of course we can talk about Sherlock as a company.
Sure. So, Nikhil, in my background, I'm a career management consultant until now, right?
Mhm,
So, I worked in financial services for over 25 years. First, around 10, 12 years, I used to do strategy consulting, focusing on
mhm,
regulatory sector reforms, helping big financial institutions set up. Right. So, did a six financial institutions set up in my career, helped a lot of central banks coming up with new set of regulations, and then pretty much in last 10, 15 years my focus shifted much more on regulatory side and the contentious situation. So when things go wrong, right, so when you have situations like deferred prosecution agreements, financial crime issues, a lot of issues related to enforcement actions, so pretty much more focused ended up on this area in last few years. But yes, most of my career has been advising financial sector, institutional investors, and financial institutions on their regulatory matters.
Great. And what basically led you to start Sherlock? So, how did you came up with the idea, first of all? And that was the first, period. I think that you're going through the first phase right now, basically. So, it would be very interesting to understand that part.
Genuinely, it's a personal pain that you go through, right?
Mm,
So I
yeah.
remember when I started my career in EY India, we were working for a major bank and we had to take
Mhm.
down every single rules and regulations and then
Mm,
map it on an Excel sheet and then map it to every single policy and procedure the bank had. And I think we were, if I'm not wrong, the engagement had a team of around 15, 20 people working full time on this.
yeah.
And the same thing I repeated for last 20 years with number of organizations. I've done this in London, I've done this with banks in US, I did the same thing in Hong Kong, same thing in Middle East, where we were mapping every single policy procedure to the regulation and trying to comprehend whether the bank is compliant to those regulation or not. And especially if you are a large organization who operates in multiple jurisdictions, situation became more and more complex. And what we realized is that in the market, RegTech came up very well in last 10, 15 years, but most RegTechs were solving a point solution, right? So in a customer journey, a RegTech will say, I can help you with KYC, or I can help you with transaction monitoring, or I can help you with compliance reporting.
Yeah.
There was nothing in the market which essentially helped take away this manual laborious work of going through regulations and interpreting them. It was highly human and highly driven by skill and experience. So that's where I saw a major gap, that something needs to change. And this has to be much more easy than each one of us, acting as a human search engines,
Yeah.
no matter where we work. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how Sherlock's idea came into being.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is something that I already still see every day, basically in financial institution, not just in Europe, but everywhere, basically. And I think that under that perspective, probably AI was one of the major enabler on how to reduce that pain, right? I
Absolutely.
think that you are using that like to streamline operations.
100%, Michael. Look, generative AI has enabled us to find a
Hmm.
solution to this problem, right? Problem existed for a long time, and it's
Hmm.
just that tech has now enabled. And I would proudly say that, right? I'm not a technologist who is looking for a solution to be solved or a problem
Yeah.
to be solved with a solution with the tech I have. It's the other way around. I'm a
Yeah.
person from the industry who has lived through the problem for 25
Mm.
years and have now come across a technology which I believe solves my industry's
Can solve the
problem for good,
problem. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it solves the problem for good. So, yeah, that's what it is. But yes,
Yeah.
the tech has significantly changed, and I do see it changing more and more. But what is also important to understand is, right, that going through regulation is also very complex. So if you look at the banking history, banking is more than 1,000-year-old profession. But compliance within banking is only 50-year-old profession. It's only in last 35, 50 years we have actually seen growth of compliance as one of the most important part. It was during my career time I saw that regulatory trade-off became an essential part of the strategy, and not just revenue market and which products to sell. Right? So regulation came at the center of the financial institution strategy only in last 35, 40 years. So this is a brand new profession. We still don't have qualification for this profession. Look, there is no university who says you take this bachelor's degree and master's degree and now you can be a world class compliance profession in any financial institution. We just don't have that, right? So, and there's nothing like you can become an engineer, lawyer, or an accountant.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist. Some certification exists loosely, but there is no proper formal education.
That's actually a very good point. And do you think
Yeah.
it's because of the regulation itself? I mean, at least what I see in Europe, but having this kind of conversation, I'm pretty sure that is the same basically everywhere else. Those kind of regulation usually change with the technology, with the time, with the economies, with the markets. So they constantly change. So having someone that is like just specifically focused on one of them, it's kind of not efficient at the moment. So you either have someone that is very high level on banking or high level on legal, and then you try to
Hmm.
match the two. And do you think that there should be a change under that perspective on how we think about
Highly
regulation?
likely. Highly likely. And time is right now to make that change. And Sherlock
Mm,
is my first move in that direction.
yeah.
The objective of Sherlock is to upgrade the level of knowledge that compliance officers have today. Demand
Mhm,
for compliance professionals went through the roof in last 20 years, right?
mhm.
And we ended up as financial institution recruiting anybody and everybody in this profession because there is no proper qualification to do. So now experience is the only thing, and that's why in the same bank, if you go with a question to two different compliance officers, you are likely to get two different answers. And it's not for their fault. It's just because everyone comes with a different set of experience and background,
Yeah,
and everyone's giving their imparting their point of view based on their background. So at an industry wide, absolutely it needs to change. Look, even when banking and financial services reached a certain level, in the olden times regulators came with an exam, right? You have to give a certain quality of exams if you want to sell securities in the market.
yeah,
Singapore still does it, UK does it, India does it, US does it. You want to be a banker, there's a certain exam you got to pass to be able to do that. So why not have that in the world of compliance as well?
yeah.
Right?
That makes a lot
And
of
what
sense.
you said is right. Regulations are changing. And that is even more reason why we need people with a certain qualification, because you need compliance officers who understands the principle of why regulations are formed, what are they meant for, and hence they have ability to understand how it will evolve without losing the principles.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that most of the time we think about regulators and regulations, of course, in two main ways. They're either the blockers of doing something, or they're rather the enabler, for new technologies, for new activities, and all of those
Correct.
kind of things. I was, wondering, how do you see them? Do you see them more as an enabler or more as a blocker? Because I think that is a very good distinction out there.
Because I genuinely believe an ideal compliance officer is a combination of both, right?
Mm, okay.
Compliance officer's job is not to make life difficult for bank and say you can't
Mhm.
do this and you can't do that. They need to make they need to enable the bank in
Mm,
achieving what the strategic objectives are. But at the
yeah.
same time, they are the guardians of the system. And if the bank goes on a wrong path, knowingly or unknowingly, they are the guardians who protect the wider global financial sector, because one blip in one place can be a catastrophe for the wider market. Right?
Yeah.
So while they have to keep the role of a guardian and protect the wider market, their job is to essentially enable. Look, at the end, we work in a capitalist world. Every
Mhm.
bank is, at the end owned by shareholders, and shareholders would expect a return on their capital.
Yeah.
Right? So while their job is to protect the institution, at the same time, their job is to enable the institution in the new world as it moves forward. I would call it something like, a controlled growth.
Hmm.
And that is where compliance officer's role is, that you grow the institution, but in a controlled manner, managing the risk and not crossing the line of regulation.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. I was wondering, how do you go from basically being on the other side, being on the compliance side, checking those regulations, trying to understand those regulations. How do you go from there to being a founder? So how hard it was that kind of passage from you? Because it's not exactly the same thing. You need to develop a new entire set of skills. So it's kind of a completely new world.
Yeah. Look, it is a brand new world. There is
Hmm.
definitely no doubt. And if you look around, the whole tech is changing every single sector. Financial
Mm,
services is no exception. You see the
mm,
same thing happening in medical sector. You can see the same thing happening in you name a sector today, and AI is impacting it. Right? There is
yeah.
barely any sector which is not. Legal sector is highly disrupted, and medical sector is disrupted. Financial services has been under disruption since the arrival of fintech. I think now is the time when the regulatory side is also going to get disrupted, and that's where it is going. Personally, look, skill set wise, I have set up professional services business 4 to 5 times in my career, where I have joined companies where the practices did not exist and I had to build those practices from scratch. In many of the cases, even the brands were not even known in the market for what I do, and I had to build it from scratch. So I'm not afraid of starting something new if the idea is right.
Yeah.
And I am a believer in that, then I will go full hog and make it happen because I genuinely believe in that. Right.
Hmm.
So I think that way, no. But am I learning every day? Of course, I'm learning every day 10 new things
Yeah.
than what I would do as a professional consultant to becoming a full time entrepreneur. And as I said, a lot of people are telling me if I'm a tech entrepreneur, and I keep telling them, no, I'm not a tech entrepreneur. Tech is just my enabler. I'm simply solving a problem of my industry in which I belong to for last 25 years.
Yeah, that's actually a very good definition. I'm not a tech entrepreneur, so it's not something that you hear very frequently from startup founders.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's a very good point.
I would love to be one, but I'm not qualified and I have a long journey to be one
Mm,
and learn that. But I do know one thing very well. I know my industry in and out, and I've worked in it globally across all continents and done a lot of work with institutions and regulators for last 25 years. So absolutely, I know where the problem is and how it
mhm,
needs to be solved and what goes behind the psyche of a board member, a compliance officer, a
mm,
CXO, or an executive. Why would they see value in it? I understand that. And I
yeah.
know what that pain is and I know how to solve that pain. So that's what I have. And that is why I'm an entrepreneur. Tech is just my name.
No, that's actually a very good answer. I was thinking, you're launching right now. You actually launched last week. How are you, moving the first steps under that perspective? Because, one of the major problem for startups,
Yep.
launching right now, and there is a lot of talks about it, is actually go to market and the sales cycle under that perspective. And you've
Yep.
been saying that you have plenty of experience under that perspective working with financial institutions all over the world.
Yep.
So I was wondering, how are you doing sales? How are you reaching those kind of executives to actually propose your solution and to actually convince them that this is the right
Yep.
solution for them?
So let's break it down in three pieces, right? So
Mm,
first one is how do I build credibility for Sherlock in the market
hmm.
as a step one. So of course, beyond my own personal experience and me driving it full time, we have about 10 senior advisors, as you would
Mm,
see on our website. And each one of them is a senior professional with 25, 30, 40 years experience. I have two senior ex regulators on my, actually, four people out of the 10 are ex regulators. One person is an ex crypto regulator, one is an ex commodities regulator, and the two individual are financial services regulator. Right. And then I have ex bankers, I have ex financial services people, and consultants from Big Four as well as likes of BCG and McKinsey, who are part of my advisors. And each one of them, I proudly say, is also my investor. So they are not just advisor because I know them for many years, but each one of them have fully committed and believed in Sherlock's vision and are part of the investor group that we have. So that's one story. Going to the market, we have two-pronged strategy, go to the market. The first one is we believe in our purpose, and our purpose is to help compliance officers up their game and be confident in what they are doing and empower and enable them. We are not building a solution which says we'll replace your compliance officers tomorrow. Not at all. In fact, if anything, we want to go 100 steps away from that. We actually want to make compliance efficient and faster. And hence, our first solution that we launched is out in the market for anybody and everybody who wants to understand compliance. So you can be a university student, you can be a front end relationship person in a bank, or you can be a compliance person. You can be a consultant working at Deloitte, BCG, McKinsey, simply doing banking client advisory work, or you can be a lawyer. Any one of you who is working in that sector, you can download Sherlock and use it on your own. Much more secured, much more reliable answers than any of the generic AI is going to give you.
Yeah.
So that is our way of reaching out to the community and bringing community on board. I'm proud to say we launched it 48 hours back, and we got 250 users in first 48 hours from
Nice.
variety of
Very
organizations
nice.
across the world, regulators, lawyers, bankers, consultants. Right, 250 of them registered with us in last 48 hours since our launch. Our second part, as you would expect, is a B2B, where we want to custom build solutions for large financial institutions, for regulators, even for professional services firm. Example, I can go to any law firm or a consulting firm today and give them a custom build solution where if they are doing some form of a gap assessment for their financial services client, they can use Sherlock and get 70 to 80% of the work done in minutes instead of days and weeks. So I can bring them efficiency. If you are a regulator, your licensing, your supervision is constantly looking at various companies' policies and procedures, and I can cut down that review time by 70 to 80% today. And if you are a financial institution, I can actually create a custom built compliance assistant in your financial institution, which can become the first port of call on compliance for any employee of the bank. So imagine the biggest ratio that regulators are pushing with financial institution from fintechs all the way to the big institution is how many people in compliance for every client facing employee you have. That's the ratio that generally gets
It's
measured.
interesting.
The tech I have built today enables me that if you are working in any financial institution, I can put a compliance assistant on your phone now. So essentially, every single employee of your company has a compliance assistant on the call 24 by 7, 365 days. And you can ask any compliance question related to your bank on that, and you get an instant answer. So that's the change we can bring. Compliance in every employee's pocket rather than talking about we have 1 is to 10 ratio or 1 is to 30 ratio for compliance versus client facing people.
I would say that's very interesting. What it seems like the most interesting part to me, the two most interesting part to me, I think that having that kind of almost B2C approach, talking directly to the employees themselves, so they can actually use it and check if they need to. And the other side that I think that is very interesting is the approach to actually regulators themselves. So they can
Yeah.
actually use a solution. This is something that you don't see much of the time. I think
Yeah.
that vast majority of the solution out there in terms of reg tech and legal tech, they either, focus on corporates or they either focus on the employees themselves. But there's very, very little companies out there that are actually focusing on the regulators themselves.
Yeah.
And that is very interesting. How did you actually, let's say, checked or validated that the regulators themselves are actually looking for something like this?
So spoke to about, I would say, 8 to 9 global regulators during this
Mm,
process. And as I said, 4x regulators are on my advisory board, right? So if
yeah.
they believed in me and they put
Hmm.
in their own hard-earned money as investors in my
Mm,
company, then that's probably is the biggest validation and proof I have today. But yes,
fair
I
point.
did go for last few years. I've been thinking about it, talking about this topic to regulators all over the world when I have traveled. So
Mm,
regulators in Hong Kong, Singapore, UK, of course, entire Middle East and then in US, where I've spoken to them, and each one of them have said, yes, this does make sense because lion's share of our time in supervision and in licensing goes in going through the documents and validating them. Right? So
No,
it's a clear
that's a
pain
good
area.
point. Mm. Yeah, I think that this is something that a lot of regulators are not actually looking into, but they could benefit a lot from those kind of things. So that's actually a very good point.
I'll also add one more thing, Michele. If you see, a lot of people have started going through AI journey a little too quickly, right? So now
Yeah.
everyone's talking about agentic AI and using bots and using agents. The fact of the matter is that this is very similar to what happened when crypto came, right?
Mm,
We all know crypto is by far the most efficient way of transferring money. Stable coins have proven that
yeah.
it is
Yeah.
efficient, it is cheap, it is undoubtedly very good. But yet,
Mm,
what is our penetration in the global
mm.
payments world, right? Because it
Very
takes a
limited at the
lot,
moment. Yeah.
very limited, right? We
Yeah.
all know that is the right technology and it
Mhm.
can change the world. But we have that for last 18 years. What is our actual adoption,
Yeah.
right? If you keep the speculative market out and only talk about ability to transfer money point A to point B at almost zero cost and instantaneously, how much are we actually using it? And I think agentic AI will go through the same journey in financial services. Regulators and industry is not ready for a bot to decide who gets credit and who does not get credit, which transaction needs to be flagged and not, who comes as a high risk or a medium risk. We have barely reached that level where we are happy for set of rules to be automated by a computer, but not a computer deciding the rule for itself, right? And
Yeah.
hence, if we were to use AI, we need to use AI in a space in which you do not touch customer data and you don't let the decision of anything being taken by an agent. You need agent as an enabler. Human in the loop is the most important part.
Yeah, I still remember. I totally agree, to be honest, but I still remember like an old slide from 1995 presentation of Microsoft done by Bill Gates, where they were saying
Yeah,
machine can never take the decision itself because the machine itself cannot be taken accountable for the decision. You
exactly.
cannot blame the machine in the end, or you cannot take them accountable. But I think that we are in a point in time where those kind of machines can actually take decision, but they will never be responsible for them. So that is a point that we
Yeah,
cannot breach. But we are actually going in a direction where they can make payments, they can take
yeah,
decision, they can write regulations if they wanted to. So
correct.
it's a very, very interesting point, to be honest. I think that in the last, let's say, year and a half, we saw a little bit of improvements driven mostly by a couple of
Yeah,
regulations. Like a specific example could be the Genius Act in the US last year,
yeah,
that enabled basically the a full stream of stablecoin companies, crypto companies, actually
absolutely.
being regulated and being compliant and actually bringing innovation into the market. I think that that's a very good example of on how to use
Right,
the regulation to be an enabler under that perspective.
correct. 100%. And the same thing with happen with agentic AI.
Yeah.
Agents will be used as an enabler to bring efficiency, but not to replace humans in the financial
Mm.
sector.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, as you said, accountability becomes very important. I
Mm.
don't know. There
Yeah.
was a very famous case a few years back in US.
Mhm.
Uh, have a quick look, but it's a very famous case where a husband and wife applied for a credit card, and
Mm.
wife got lesser credit than husband. And then it was realized because it was the credit was completely machine operated. The rules
Okay.
just decided to give wife lesser credit than the
Hmm.
husband, although they both are equal partners, same business, same estate,
Yeah.
right? And this can happen. So you cannot
Yeah. Yeah.
let tech decide on the rules.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think that we need to make a step forward in terms of how we set up the rule and what we actually enable and what we actually allow. So we
Yeah,
cannot just say, okay, we have always been doing like that, so we can step back, and relax. We
yeah,
should, be very up to date and up to speed with with those kind of technologies because they're here to stay in the end. So they're not
absolutely.
coming back. But I was wondering, you've been mentioning a couple of very interesting regulation from Hong Kong to Singapore to the US, of course, the MENA region. I was wondering how different you see, launching a company right now or a fintech company right now, um, in the MENA region or in the US or in Southeast Asia. So how is your experience about it? So how different it is, and maybe also with a little bit of um, uh, you know with a question there, what would be like the perfect regulation to launch a company like this one right now, if you can choose?
No, look, frankly, we are not a regulated entity, right?
Yep.
We are in the place where we are, a tech company that solves the regulatory problem,
Yep.
but we don't provide financial services.
Yeah,
So
of
it
course.
changes very different for me. And frankly, we are a US based company,
Hmm.
and we now have an operating entity in Abu Dhabi, and we are soon
Hmm.
going to have one in Europe, and we are going to have one in Asia as well, right?
Hmm.
So we can practically operate from anywhere in the world
Hmm.
because we are not regulated. But yes, if you are into regulated business, then definitely every single geography makes a huge difference depending on what kind of services you want to provide, right? So example, Singapore today is very forward looking when it comes to payments and microcredit. They have really done a fantastic job, right, compared to many other geographies. But if you are, again, payments, UK has done a fantastic job as well. But if you look at the crypto as a segment, then probably UAE stands out significantly compared to any other place when it comes to crypto regulation and the forward thinking that UAE has in that area. But when you simply look at the market, then frankly, by far, US is the biggest market for everything,
Yeah.
right? And you can't ignore that, right? So margins are highest, and it's
Mm.
it's really very good. But now you look at the other way of equation, you look
Mm.
at the talent pool. Where do I actually get the most talented people?
Mm.
Right. So today, fact of the matter is that within financial services fintech, right, there are certain hubs where you see the most innovation in fintech place. Singapore is one center, UK is one, Amsterdam is really coming up really very well as another fintech hub
Yep.
with very innovative products coming out of that market,
Yep.
right? And similarly, you see Middle East, UAE is absolutely one of the one. Saudi has also very recently come up with some very
Yep.
interesting, fintechs in Saudi Arabia as well. And then, of course, you have US. US is divided between East Coast and West Coast, where you see innovative stuff coming up. But pretty much globally, these are the hubs where you
Mhm.
see a true innovation coming out in financial services that has ability to impact the world.
No, that's a fair point. I would say that there was also in a short period of time also Berlin that was a very interesting
Yeah,
fintech hub, but I do agree that has been replaced probably in Europe by Amsterdam. Right now, I see more
yeah.
innovation in Amsterdam than it was in Berlin, for example, and that's totally true. You've mentioned a very interesting point that is the talent pool. So, how do you make sure that you hire the right people with the right set of skills in so many different regulations? So basically, in
Yeah.
few words, how are you doing hiring under that perspective?
So look, that's the reason why we are going to set up a European hub.
Mm.
The whole idea with the European hub is to identify, 15 to 20 talented people who have that experience in compliance and legal side experience that we can bring together, and that becomes our regulatory hub for the
Hmm.
world, right? But to be fair, today that kind of a talent exist for the best value of money actually in Europe than anywhere else. Right. And yes, finding talent is not that easy. So my tech hub is in India.
Yeah.
Right. My biggest commercial hubs are likely going to be New York and Abu
Yeah.
Dhabi. But my actual talent hub, if I call it what will be the brains behind Sherlock, that's what I'm setting up in Europe now.
Mhm. That's a very interesting take, to be honest, and it's not that common usually. You have a lot of companies out there trying to do hiring, and of course, with different verticals, you have different kind of apps, as you said,
Yeah.
and it's not very likely that they will choose Europe. And do you think that kind of choice is also made by the kind of regulation that we have in Europe, because we have always been very highly regulated from a financial perspective, and that's also, at least in my opinion, what led us to have great neobank like, for example, Revolut in the UK,
Correct.
or others. So, do you think that has that was a
And
variable in that kind of choice?
yes, 100%. And I will also add, Michele, what happens is that in Europe, right, UK included, we have
Mm,
EU and then we have rest, right?
yeah.
So there is a lot of complexity in the regulation because you need to understand EU, you need to understand global standard like Basel, then you need to understand your country's own regulations and priority.
Mm,
So the
yeah.
talent pool that I get there has significant ability to understand a complex regulatory environment, right?
Mm,
Whereas if I look for a talent out of, frankly, in Singapore or Hong Kong, then people's knowledge is limited to one central regulator in that market, right? So I am looking for talent who can understand multiple regulations around the world, do a comparison and tell me, hey, Bhavin, look, this is the kind of regulations for consumer protection in US with insurance, but if I compare the same consumer protection in Germany for insurance, and then now let's compare it to Vietnam, this is the difference I can see. That level of human intelligence is required, right?
yeah.
And to be fair, that is the biggest moat I have in building Sherlock, right? The standard question many people, investors, have asked me, why can't I replicate it? I said, yeah, go ahead, try it, right? Because building a tech which can read regulation is very easy. It's already
Yeah.
available. You don't need
Yeah.
me. You can create a GPT today and do it. But the fact of the matter, the moat lies in your ability to understand these regulation,
Yeah.
understand the cross connection, build a vector database which allows a precise answer to come out in a language in which is universally accepted as a legal or regulatory language. Right? So
Yeah.
hence
I I,
Europe
I think
is
it's
a
yeah.
likely place for us to
I think it's a
identify
very
that
good
kind of a talent.
example. Yeah, I think it's a very, very good example of, those kind of things where the human mind behind the tech is even more
Right.
important than the tech itself. So you need to
Absolutely.
have the human behind it.
And look, as I said before, tech is an enabler. We need to put the intelligence of humans inside the tech for the
Yeah.
tech to operate, and then keep on upgrading that with more human
Mm.
intelligence added to that layer.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I was wondering, you've been mentioning a couple of very interesting, let's say, trends in
Yeah,
fintech overall, stable coins, crypto, but also AI,
yeah.
of course. I was wondering, which are the main things that you are looking at right now in fintech? The main trends that actually sparkle your interest, or maybe also the kind of things that you are looking at right now that you think will be impacted by the regulation on the long term, that you need to be aware of when they're coming?
So I would say this: if you are a fancy digital bank which is only
Mm,
known for a flashy fluorescent credit card, then I think
mm,
those times are gone. I
mm,
think they have not been, these kind of banks have not been able to do anything to the big banks. 10 years
mm.
back, they all came up as the biggest threat to the banking community.
Yeah.
And I still remember I was a Deloitte partner and we did a big paper. If the big banks will turn into
Mm,
infrastructure, and these kind of digital fintechs will become the actual front end with retail, right? But if you look around globally, that hasn't necessarily done as much change as that was expected, right?
yeah.
Buy now pay later is another such example. Yes, it has penetrated in lot of markets, but has it significantly changed the buying behavior of people? That remains still questionable, right?
Yeah.
So fundamentally, where I see the change happening is, can you make your customer journey significantly smoother and faster, right?
Mm,
So I'll give you two examples, and I deal with both these banks for Sherlock.
mhm.
I have my bank account with Vio in UAE, and I
Okay.
have Mercury in US, right?
Okay.
Check these two banks and check their journey. I don't even know who these guys are. I've not met
Mhm,
them, but I'm using them, right, for
mhm.
last few months, and it is significant client experience difference. If
Yeah.
you are dealing with these kind of banks, on they go above and beyond traditional banking, right? They are
Mhm.
happy to help you with your tax filing, they are happy to help you with your invoicing, they are happy to
Yeah.
make sure that you upload an invoice and automatically it scans and is happy to process the payment, you just need to approve it. So if you build any tech in fintech that will significantly save time for people, then yes, you have a long term future, because that is value creation. You create
Mm.
value in form of saving people's time. So
Yeah.
if you create that value, then there is a long term value. But if it's just about a fancy marketing with a flashy card, then that is going to end sooner or later.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. I think that is one of those painful truths that banks should be asking out there to themselves. But I totally agree. I think that, for example, Mercury is a very good product. I've been seeing
Yeah,
them, and it's a very good product. I think it's one of those kind of things that actually help you stay sharp to reduce time and those kind of
yeah.
things. I was wondering because you mentioned a very good point.
Stripe
You
is also a
mentioned
very good example, right?
yes,
Stripe is
I agree.
fantastic.
Yeah. There's
Because
also
they
a couple
actually
of
save your
companies.
time.
Yeah, yeah, very true. And there's also a couple of very good companies that are trying to do the same with account-to-account payments.
Yep,
There was a full trend about account-to-account payment in 2020, 2021 that
yep,
like actually, let's say, uh, went a little bit unnoticed after a little bit, but it's
yeah,
coming back very strongly. And I think it's very interesting because it's reducing and is eliminating intermediaries in the middle, first of all, and it's reducing the
correct.
time to pay, and you don't need anything else to pay. You just need the app of your bank, and it's very, very useful. But I was wondering, because you've been mentioning a couple of interesting trends like BNPL and other things, do you what do you think about the kind of effects of those kind of solutions? There was a very interesting conversation, a very interesting discussion about the impact of BNPL on the credits and on the debts of retail customers. For example, in Europe, we don't see high level of personal debts to people compared, for example, to the US. But BNPL was kind of changing that. How do you see that kind of technology impacting the life of people in the end?
And I think the issue is not that whether BNPL is giving the right solution. If you
Hmm.
actually tap in BNPL right, then you
Yeah.
have a very good story. You get the consumer at the early age when they are in their
Mm.
university or starting their careers. And then
Yeah.
if you upsell beyond BNPL, then you have a customer journey for next
Mm.
35, 40 years, right? You grow with
Yeah.
your customer
Good
base.
point.
So you get
Yeah.
100,000 customer and you grow with their base and start adding more services. So your client grows and you grow and their journey
Mm.
becomes your journey. So at no point they need to leave you and go to any other bank because you grow with them. So
Yeah.
that could be a phenomenal journey. So your starting point can be BNPL, but your end product could be a proper universal bank.
Hmm.
The two things that are important. One is that as you go in that journey, fintechs need to recognize that regulation will come. Yes,
Yeah.
when you are a fintech, there are low bar of regulations. But as you go into the world of credit, at the end of the day, you will be required to keep a regulatory capital, right? And at
Yes.
that point, you are getting into the same zone as other banks with low margin, high cost, high regulations. And then you need to know how viable your business is.
Yeah.
The second part with BNPL is, as you said, credit. Issue is not that BNPL gives credit. Issue is,
Mm.
are regulators and governments able to calculate the real personal credit or not?
Mm.
Right.
That's a
So there
very
are
interesting
certain
question.
governments who
Mm.
calculate it, and there are certain banks who say, okay, how do I calculate what is Michele's personal debt? Then I'm going to look at how many credit cards you have. Okay, I know what kind of loans you have, student loans,
Yeah.
housing loan, and that becomes your personal credit. What today most governments don't know is how many BNPL transactions that you have done, and that is over and above that credit.
Yeah.
And as a government, I may not have any clue the level of penetration it has happened in short term credit, because this is a short term credit which is
Yeah.
over and above your card, right?
Yeah.
So
It's basically a
what
card transaction in the end, so it's not credit.
uh,
It's exactly not credit. Let's say in the specific way.
yep, yep. And that's where it can happen that you have an overexposure in the market which
Mm.
goes untapped, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is not that these things should not be there. The idea is, how do you actually monitor and make sure
Mm.
it is within the range of viability and the product is being sold to the right people who truly make the best of it, and it's not getting sold for the purpose of building numbers to the to the set of people who really don't need that product, right?
Hmm.
So
No,
that's
that's
where
actually
the
a very good
overexposure
point.
for the market can happen.
Yeah, I think that it's very true. I think that there are a couple of governments out there they're trying to do that. You've been
Yeah,
mentioning one in Singapore, but let's say overall Southeast Asia, under that point of view, is very interesting. For example, take a
yeah,
look at what is happening in Philippines with microcredit. That is very, very interesting.
yeah,
And then you also have the example of the US with the FICO score and with the credit score.
yeah,
They have been, using that for
yeah,
a long period of time. And I think that this is one of those kind of good example where the regulation is there to protect you and to try to avoid,
yes,
big problem or
correct,
some kind of overexposure from retail customers, because obviously not everyone out there has the kind of competencies, skills, and education
correct,
in the end to actually
correct.
calculate his own credit score.
Yeah,
So you should be having someone out there trying to protect you, and that is the whole of the
absolutely.
regulation in the end.
Yeah. And that's why monitoring that personal credit is important, because that then
Mm.
enables the regulator to decide what levers to use to manage the overall credit exposure for the population.
Yeah, it's a very, very good
Oh,
point.
no, I think it's important.
Maybe I was wondering, you've been mentioning, the different kind of regulation and the different kind of markets that you are going into. We didn't talk about, capital itself, because you're launching a startup right now. You
Yep.
didn't do fundraising, if I remember correctly. I was wondering, are you planning to do something like that? How do you see the venture capital market out there, if you are talking with them, of course?
Sure. So, Michele, we did a pre-seed round. We
Mm,
raised
okay.
around $2.8 million in
Okay.
pre-seed round.
Mm,
We will be definitely looking for much more funds, because if you want
mm,
to grow
okay.
globally with the vision and the scale that we have, then yes, we need to have a next round
Mm,
where
okay.
we would be raising around $8 to $10 million in coming
Mm,
months. Who should we be talking to? Yes, of course, we are talking to a few VCs, and we are genuinely
mm,
interested in any global VC who would like to speak with us. Our keen interest is much more on people who will buy our vision, because
mm,
what we are trying to build is going to be industry defining, and it's going to change the way in which people operate in the world of compliance globally.
mm.
So I think what we are looking for is strategic investments from people who really understand our vision and who are happy to support us, help us through this whole journey. So yeah, open to all discussions.
In the end is enabler again, not just the capital itself. You're looking for partner basically that can open doors for you.
Absolutely. And look, there are two ways of going, right? One is that somebody who is already strategically operating in this space and
Yeah.
sees us as a natural extension, that is one. But the other alternative is also is that you have look at large LLMs today. We
Mm,
already got a connector for Claude and ChatGPT, and we are building connectors for Gemini and Copilot as well. And that is fundamentally because we know that these four are likely going to be the AI operating system for large
yep.
corporates in the future. Right.
Yep.
And so if tomorrow somebody like Michele says, "Hey, Bhavin, in my institution, I'm already using Claude. Why do I need another AI from you?"
Mm,
And
yep.
I'm very used to working in Claude, right? Or I'm very
Mm,
used to using Copilot. And all you can say, my company only allows Claude or my company only allows Copilot. And that's why we did a plugin of Sherlock inside each one of them that continue using what you are using. But when it comes to regulation, use our connector and you get a much more reliable answer. But you are still within the realms of what is comfortable to you to work on. So that's another area in which we can see a strategic connection.
that's a good point. Maybe last question from my side. This is something that I usually ask every guest here. So, what would be an advice from you to a young entrepreneur out there that is either looking to start his own company in regtech, in fintech, or to start his own career in the compliance side? What would you advise them to do?
So I would say a few things. First, there is no shortcut,
Hmm.
and there
Okay.
is no, there is nothing called one day all of a sudden you do it. No, there's a lot of homework required, right?
Okay.
My work of last 25 years enabled me to do what I am doing. If I were to do it from the start, then I would at least probably spend 1.5 2 years understanding the market, identifying the
Hmm.
gap, get into nitty gritty of nuances. And that is very important. Unless you don't spend that significant time and energy to understand, where the market is and what you are doing, you will not be able to build a solution that truly makes an impact. B, I would also suggest that we all see the traction of valuation game and people trying to build startups and move up the ladder. I would love to do the same as well. But the hard reality is that you ultimately need to build a solution that user is willing to pay for,
Yeah.
right? And that is important. So don't build a company with a view to make a biggest startup. Build a company with a view that you're going to build a product that somebody is willing to pay $1 for.
Yeah. So basically, build something that will solve a problem in the end.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
somebody is willing to pay for solving that problem.
Yeah.
You can
That's
solve a
the
lot of
stuff forward.
problem, but
Yeah.
people may not be willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for
It's a
solving
very
my
good point.
problem, but I don't want to pay for it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That was the missing gap in the analysis. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Bhavin, thank you very much for being with me today here. It was very, very interesting to listen to you, and good luck with everything that
Thank
you're
you.
building with Sherlock. I'm pretty sure that you're gonna do very, very interesting things.
Thank you, Michele, and pleasure to talk to you and very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you
that.
very much. Have a good one. Thank you.
Bye.